Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be back here in Stockholm. And in fact, your questions, we're looking at Sweden in 10 years from now. And in fact, it's almost exactly 10 years since I was last in Stockholm. And many things, I'm sure, have changed. One thing that hasn't changed is the snow. And that's a delight, in fact, for me to see again. It's a very good opportunity, and I'm very happy to be able to step back with you from the higher education sector and look at how higher education fits into the broader skills for the future, and to present for you an international context that I hope will nourish your discussions during the rest of this conference. I also hope that what I am about to show you will also give you some food for thought in relation to those three questions that you have just responded to. So let me start by explaining how I'm going to structure my presentation. First, I want to invite you to look at skills through the lens of the OECD Skills Strategy. And I'll explain to you what that is in a moment. Then we'll take a closer look at higher education and how it plays a role in developing skills for the knowledge-based economy, the economy of the future. And then lastly, I just want to highlight 2 or 3 of the challenges that are facing higher education systems in a rapidly evolving world. So, let's start with the OECD Skills Strategy. Why do we focus on this? Why is it so important to us? Well, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started a whole of OECD reflection on the expertise and evidence around skills and how they affect the economy and society. And we brought all this evidence together and summarized it in this publication you see that we presented to our ministers, our governing board, in 2012. And the key points that the evidence made clear, and you can go back and read our publication to see the evidence that we brought together. First, skills transform lives and drive economies. Now you might say, well, that's basic, but actually it's important to keep underlining that skills are vital. Because we know that what people know and what they can do has a major impact on their life chances. But we also know that building the right skills can help economies improve both economic prosperity and social cohesion. And I want to underline, it's not either or, it's both. By contributing to social outcomes such as trust, health, civic engagement, social engagement, supporting improvement in productivity and growth, and also supporting high levels of employment in good quality jobs. Excuse me, I just need a little water. So, what do we mean by the OECD Skills Strategy? Well, we brought together all our work on skills across the OECD into a framework and a lens, if you like, for us to look at how countries can enhance their skills so as to actually achieve the economic prosperity and the social cohesion. Because what we've found is that it's very interconnected. It's not just a matter of the education system over here. it's not just a matter of labour markets over here, it's not just a matter of the workplace over here and everybody doing their own thing. No, what we found is that it's all interconnected. We've also found that it's not just a matter of governments or even governments and social partners deciding what needs to happen and then somehow it happens. What we've learnt is that if countries really want to get better outcomes from their people, it requires a concerted effort by everybody working together. So what we've done, our skills strategy, which is a framework, looks at how to develop relevant skills, making sure that skills are actually brought to the labour market, because if people have skills and they're not using them, then it's a waste. And it's a waste in social and human terms as well as economic terms. And then making sure that people are able to put their skills to effective use. So I'm very quickly going to go through each one of these to explain in a little more detail what they involve. First of all, developing relevant skills. Well, the first question that arises is, what are relevant skills? Another one is how to develop them effectively. That's about where and when, and of course, how. But also, it's about who needs to do what and who needs to be involved. Now, what I want to show you is just a couple of slides that actually come from some work from the European Union, but it shows what share of workers reported new processes or technologies in their own workplace over the past 3 years that actually affected how they do their jobs. And you can see, in fact, in Sweden, you come out at the top of the graph, because this captures how dynamic the working environment is and how much change is taking place. And the same survey also asked respondents about how much restructuring or reorganisation is taking place. And again, Sweden comes out as one of the highest. Now, that's an indication of the dynamism of the economy. It's an indication of how technology is being adapted, how much effort is being put into changing the workplace so that it's being more productive, so that it's producing different products, different services, and so forth. But it also indicates how much changing skill demands are being placed on people. So what I want to show you now, one of the big challenges is, well, what are the skills that people have, or the economy as a whole has? That actually turns out to be quite difficult to find out. We now have a wonderful survey that we carried out and published for 24 countries in late 2013, the Survey of Adult Skills, and we've got a huge amount of the publication with the first results is about that thick, and further analysis, the stack is growing day by day. It's a wonderful database. It tells us about the 3 foundation skills that we've measured directly: literacy, numeracy, and what we call problem solving in technology-rich environments. So I'm just showing you a snapshot of the results for literacy, and you can see that Sweden actually does quite well, that you have quite a high share of people who have level 3, level 4, level 5. So these are strong levels of literacy competencies, and we find that literacy is very highly correlated with other skills, and particularly advanced skills, because if people do not have strong literacy, it's very difficult for them to make sense or navigate their way through the higher education system. So if we look at how people have navigated their way through the higher education system, or at least a snapshot of what we can get from the survey of adult skills, we can see that if we take the group of 16 to 29-year-olds who have completed higher education, and tertiary type A is bachelor degree and above, then we can see that in every country there's actually quite a spread of graduates and what their literacy skills are. So we're still trying to disentangle how much of this is related to what share of the cohort goes to higher education, what level of skills they start higher education with, and of course what higher education contributes to these skill levels. But it just gives you an indication of the results of this youth cohort who have been through higher education. Just one other little indicator on the overall level of skills from the survey, and this shows the gap between immigrants' literacy skills and the skills of the native-born population. And in many ways, this is no surprise. And the adjusted values are when we hold everything else constant and just look at literacy. So that is a challenge that many countries are facing. There's many statistics that I could show you from our comparative education databases, but we need to move on. So let's turn to the equally important question of activating skill supply. And there's various reasons why some people are outside the labour market. Sometimes it's a choice, it's a lifestyle choice. But often we can find in a number of countries that people are outside the labour market because actually it doesn't pay for them to be in the labour market. It's just not financially worthwhile for all sorts of different reasons. We also find that in some countries there are sort of not directly financial barriers, such as difficulty in care arrangements, finding adequate childcare, care for elderly relatives, and so forth. There can be a number of different non-financial barriers, or indeed policies around older workers, and in some countries, policies to push them a little bit, out of the labour market. That's also one of the challenges. So, just to give you two country examples, Korea and the Netherlands, we can find there's some quite different patterns across countries, and there are different reasons and different policy explanations behind each country's circumstances. But we do find, and this is important, that there are a lot of skills outside the labour market that actually, that could be brought usefully into the labour market. There's sometimes a mindset which says, well, those who are outside the labour market, they don't have any skills anyway. So why do you think it's so important to bring them into the labour market? In fact, if we look at this new evidence from our survey of adult skills, we can see that actually in countries, and some countries in particular, there are, if we look at Korea and Japan, for example, there are some very big sort of losses of opportunity because of their policy settings that keep people out of the labour market, particularly in the case of Japan and Korea women. So let me move on because I don't have very much time. Putting skills to effective use, are people in the right jobs for their skills? If somebody is has a wonderful set of skills that could be used very effectively in the job over here, but they live over here and they end up serving coffee or waitressing in a restaurant, then that's a waste of skills opportunity. Could employers, in the way they design the work environment, make better use of their employees' skills? That's a very difficult thing for us at the OECD to get a good grasp of what's going on in the workplace and how skills are used in the workplace, but our intuition tells us it's extremely important. But also, are there alternative, better ways of using skills? What about entrepreneurship? What about freelancing? What about innovation to stimulate better use of skills? And can economies evolve towards more high-skilled jobs? Well, let's take a look at what we found when we asked workers through the survey of adult skills what their jobs required. And here you can see that in most countries, with a few exceptions, there were very few jobs that required primary education or less. And an increasingly large share, as you go down the graph, of countries where the jobs, if they were recruiting today, require higher education or more. So, coming to one of your questions, which was, will more jobs require higher education in 10 years' time? This is actually from the European Union CEDEFOP agency, their projections on job opportunities. And this is where the jobs openings are going to come. And what you can see is that for those who have, I'm sorry for the terminology, ISKED 5 and 6, that means bachelor degree or above, you can see that this is where the high growth in new jobs is coming. But even more important, there's a lot of jobs where people are moving out into retirement and need to be replaced by people with high levels of skills and qualifications corresponding to higher education. So I've just tried to give you a snapshot of why some of the evidence around skills and why it's important to think about it as a whole. I'd like very quickly now to talk a bit about the higher education sector and how the role it plays in developing a knowledge-based economy. First of all, just to recap why higher education is important, and this is the outcome of a reflection we did with our member countries, asking them to summarize with us why higher education is important. And they identified three key areas. One is contributes to economic outcomes. Secondly, though, also it contributes to social outcomes. And thirdly, it delivers global benefits. So I won't go through all of those because we're running short on time, but my PowerPoint will be made available to everyone after the presentation. But also, it's very important because higher education in pretty much every country absorbs considerable economic resources. Both public resources, the taxpayers' money, but also a lot of personal investment goes into higher education. And I think we mustn't overlook the amount of individual investment that people make if they want to get a higher education, and therefore why it's very important to make it worthwhile for them and high quality. And the higher education system is evolving rapidly. So what we find, and this is a somewhat indirect answer to your second question, if we look at the share of 25 to 34-year-olds who have completed tertiary education, we find there's been a pretty significant increase everywhere. I think the only country where it hasn't increased very much is the United States and Belgium, but those are countries that were already close to the OECD average. And in some countries, the increase has been dramatic. Now, in fact, this is not us exactly answering the question, what about the share going into higher education? As it turns out, that's actually a bit more complicated to get internationally comparable data, though we do have it, but this is an indication, and we could project forward if we wanted to, and I'll show you some results of projecting forward later on. Also, this just shows you the employment rates for the same group. They are higher with tertiary education than just upper secondary school, but actually the big difference on employment outcomes is whether or not you completed upper secondary school. So this, there are other aspects and returns to higher education, such as salaries and earnings, but that also depends very much on the nature of the labour market in different countries and how wage salary scales are structured. So what I'd like to do now is talk about how to go about developing skills and the challenges for higher education. A first question is, well, which high-level skills do economies actually need for economic prosperity, social cohesion, and for thriving societies? And what skills do individuals need to navigate their way through this fast-changing economy? Turns out there's three broad groups of skills, and they all seem to be equally important. The first is advanced technical skills, and that's things like medicine or law or management skills, engineering, economics, and so on and so forth. I think those are straightforward and typically correspond to fields of study. Then there's a second group of what we would call advanced cognitive skills. So ability to reason, to understand logic, to solve problems, to see complexity, to see the interconnections between apparently disparate elements and bring them together. And then the third set of skills, we call them social and emotional skills or socio-emotional skills, things like interpersonal relations, teamwork, resilience, initiative, creativity. There's a whole group of skills which turn out to be pretty important. And just three supporting elements that help to answer these questions. One is, what is the feedback we can get from employers about what really matters in the workplace? What are the skills that really matter? And this is where we've understood much more clearly from some sophisticated research work the importance of those social and emotional skills. And someone, say, who's got a brilliant maths or engineering degree but cannot work with anybody else is going to struggle in making performing effectively in most workplaces. It's also about understanding what's the economic development and the needs of economic development in each different country, but also, what are the future needs of society? And I'll come at the end to talk about one of the big elements there in terms of that. A second set of challenges, well, how can higher education actually develop and enhance these skills? And this turns out to be a matter of awareness of the labour market needs, well-designed curricula around clearly established competencies that the education system is seeking to develop. Then, of course, the effective teaching and pedagogy to deliver those competencies. And a fourth point that we've found extremely important is work-relevant experience. Now, sometimes that's internships, sometimes it's things like being involved in running clubs and societies and things like that, or projects with industry. There are various different ways, but it does turn out to be very important. Universities can't develop their students in isolation from the world they're going to be living in. In terms of some of the elements that need to support this, the engagement of all the stakeholders, from employers, from academics, from students, unions, governments, local societies, and so forth. Alignment of incentives so that if you want to achieve something, say you want more effective teaching and pedagogy, but the salary scales and the career progression paths for academics are based around research, then you're going to really have trouble because the incentives are not aligned to achieve effective teaching and pedagogy. And of course, evaluation of what works. And that sounds simple, but it turns out to be missing almost always. Thirdly, how can higher education systems become more responsive to changing skill needs in labour market contexts? And here, it's about having greater institutional flexibility. It's having funding models that provide the incentives to be responsive, so greater institutional flexibility so that you can respond, the incentive structure to make you want to respond, or the institutions want to respond, and strategic partnerships. How can universities work in collaboration with their local community, with employers, and so on and so forth. This depends on effective management systems, particularly within the universities. It also depends, once again, on evaluation of what works. It also has to require a commitment to engagement with partners. And we find there's some excellent examples of good practices in different countries that are emerging. That's very exciting when we hear about the innovations around strategic partnerships. And the last sort of question, well, how do we know what's happening? Well, we can look at a number of different indicators and measures. One of the things is, what are the factors influencing labour market outcomes? What are the indicators? So those are things like the field of study, what institutions people go to, the economic context, work experience. You know, we can see that those graduates with work experience, all else equal, will have a better chance of smooth transition to the labour market than those who don't. Indicators of labour market outcomes, you know, we've got employment, we've got earnings. We're increasingly aware that that's not sufficient to give us a good set of indicators of labour market outcomes. We also need to know about skills match. Are people in good jobs that use their skills? Job satisfaction, and again also things like what's the role of entrepreneurship or self-employment. Some industries are increasingly going to freelancing contracting arrangements. What are the implications of that for the way we understand and measure labour market outcomes from higher education? Competency-based qualifications. These are qualifications that actually reflect relevant skills, that they are easy to understand, and that they are actually comparable across different qualifications, so that employers know what it is that is being, what a person is able to do. And the last category, which is the much more difficult one, is or challenging one, is the direct assessment of skills and what role that can play. In our survey of adult skills, we've done a start on direct assessment of skills that people have. There are a number of initiatives within countries trying to look at direct measures of skills, and in some countries, employers have moved towards direct assessment of candidates' skills because they don't have confidence in the qualifications and what that represents. So that's a sort of kind of sobering thought about what is really happening and how effective are the qualifications in reflecting what people can do. So lastly, I just want to highlight 2 or 3 challenges that are facing higher education systems in what is a rapidly evolving world. The first one is demographics, and this is the age structure of the OECD as a whole in 2000. If we look at the age structure in 2050, it is going to be dramatically different. And I cannot underscore enough how much this is going to fundamentally influence the shape of higher education. And we are seeing this already in countries where they've, in a sense, hit the demographic wall sooner rather than later. Korea, for example, is the most rapidly aging population country in the OECD, and dealing with a shrinking, dramatically shrinking youth cohort is causing major challenges for the way in which their institutions are organized, but also how they think about the role of higher education and how flexibly they can respond to it. It has an impact. These demographics are going to have a profound impact on the skills that are demanded by the labor market. You know, what are the needs, the shifting needs and the changing needs of older populations? What are their consumption patterns going to be like? What are going to be their health needs? And so on and so forth. It's going to have a big impact on what higher education institutions offer and who they target if they want to survive. Because, you know, if your intake of youth is shrinking dramatically, if you're a higher education institution, you've basically got two choices. You've either got to shrink your services, or you've got to find new services. And this is where we find institutions developing services for upskilling mid-level, mid-age groups who are wanting to increase their skills for the job they're doing today, or indeed change direction and do something else. But also demographics is going to have a big impact on the financing of higher education because of the impact, the indirect impact of demographics on public finances. That's something I did 20 years ago when I was in the OECD. I was looking at the impact of aging populations on public deficits and public debt. So the second big challenge is the economic development in what we see as an increasingly interconnected global world. And this is just a path showing global value chains across the world, and we are now going to be tracking in future these flows in value added, trade in value added, and look at the implications of those. This is one of the projects we have coming up in the next 2 or 3 years. The implications of these flows on jobs and skills. And, you know, this is really going to be dramatically influencing the flows of who does what where, is going to influence how we think about the skills that each economy needs and the role of higher education in providing that. Just to show you the impact of overall economic development at a global level, these are some projections that were done, very long-term projections, by our colleagues in the economics department about 3 years ago now. And you can see that by 2050, 2 countries, China and India, are going to be producing close to half the world's output. That is going to be, those 2 economies are going to be hugely significant economically. And the world is, you know, and higher education is going to need to adjust to that reality. That's also a lot of opportunity. And what we also see is tertiary graduate numbers, and these are the projections we've done based on participation in higher education today, or actually they were done a couple of years ago, and projecting forward. And you can see that there's going to be a huge increase in young tertiary graduates, so that by 2020, there'll be more than 140 million youth with tertiary qualifications. And look where they are mostly coming from. Where is the big growth? It's in China again and India. And then you can go down and you see the United States and so forth. So the last point I'd like to make is that higher education, whether those in the higher education sector like it or not, has become, in effect, a global marketplace. And all higher education institutions are directly or indirectly affected by international students, by presence in the global world, by preparing young people for a global world. So it's a very, very interconnected global world that we live in, with a lot of future and a lot of challenges around skills. I've just focused on three of those challenges, and I've just focused on skills for the future. But it is clear that countries, whatever their situation today, need higher education systems to be high performing. They need higher education systems that are well designed for the skill needs of the future. And just to say that we're about to start some new work on how to benchmark higher education system performance so that we can actually improve our understanding of the factors that matter for performance and provide countries with new insights on how their systems are doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for an interesting speech, Deborah. I will now open up for questions from the audience. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, and I have 2 requests for you eager to ask questions. I want you to ask your question in English, and I also want your question to be a question. So those are my requests for you. And now I open up the floor. Anyone, raise your hand. We have 1 question over here, and you will have the microphone. And please tell us who you are and your question.
1, 2, 3. Yeah. My name is Ole Dahlberg. I'm from the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers. Tough requirements. Question, short. I would just like to thank you for introducing skills rather than higher education. I find that this broadens the perspective, and I hope we will stick to that broader theme the entire day. So, but if you could be a little bit more specific there, because you mention all these things, but you do it sort of in a roundabout way. You point out that skills are paramount, but we're talking about higher education as in going to college. And I think that skills and university studies aren't necessarily always relevant. I mean, you can go for 5 or 10 years at university without acquiring any skills. So how is your view on that? Like how should a nation act in order to not only focus on higher degrees, master's degrees, research, but actually other kinds of competencies that are equally important? The industry in which engineers work depends as much on people working with the products in production as on engineers. If all of them were replaced by engineers, it would not work.
Deborah, please.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, because I'm responsible for, at the OECD, for our work on skills beyond the school level. And one of the really valuable aspects of that is that I'm responsible for vocational education and training, but also for higher education. And one of the challenges is often those two are seen as a competition, which is most unfortunate, because really we actually need the full range of skills, and actually it matters less where people get the skills than what skills they have got. And so one of the things that we try and do is to look at it in a skills framework rather than different sorts of providers. We also underline the importance of good pathways between different ways of acquiring skills through vocational education, high-level post-secondary vocational education, and university degrees. And thirdly, we really are very concerned about the quality of career guidance that many young people get about which pathway they should follow. And that's something that when we look across countries, whether it's in the way students are channeled into higher education or indeed into vocational education, we think pretty much most countries could do better on career guidance and making sure that people are getting relevant skills through whatever pathway, and it's not if you're good, you go to higher education, and if you're not so good academically, you go to vet, because that's not a helpful way of looking at skills for the future.
Thank you. More questions? One more question. We have time for one more question. Are you a bit shy? Raise your hand if you have a question. No? Okay, I have a question for you myself.
Yeah.
It's about reskilling, and you mentioned a bit about reskilling. The higher your education level, the more education you will demand throughout your working life. And you mentioned how this can be a challenge for the higher education sector, but how about other stakeholders? How about, for example, the labor market or politicians? How should they take on this challenge of reskilling, demand of reskilling, and that role that the higher education will, they will have a more important role in the future when it comes to reskilling?
Again, a very, very important question. It's something which, with our skills strategy framework, we can understand better the interplay between the labour market conditions and the opportunities for reskilling. So if we want people to be able to reskill at the middle of their career, that depends not just on opportunities in the higher education sector and how easily the sector can adapt to offer these courses, but it also depends on the conditions in the labour market, the way in which the labour market works, the opportunities, and also the incentives, the attitudes of employers. There's a whole load of elements that come into play. So it's not just a matter of the higher education sector saying, we will offer it and they will come. But it really depends on the conditions in each country.
Deborah, thank you so much for coming to Stockholm. And on behalf of TCO, and I think also on behalf of the audience, we want to thank you for sharing your knowledge. And we will give you a small token of gratitude. It is a gift certificate from TCO and UNICEF. So thank you for coming, and a warm applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lovely.